The secret truths of central bank digital currencies that nobody is talking about. I'm going to explain this to you, and I'm going to tell you how you can protect yourself from the future tyranny of central bank digital currencies in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go over how the current system works. All right, this first quadrant is how most people view the monetary system. So we have the average Joe right here that takes his bag of money and he gives it to the bank. Now, I know this bag of money may be in the form of an electronic transfer or wire, but still in people's minds, when they deposit money at the bank, like their paycheck, they see this as them giving the bank something. And then the bank takes what they gave them and they might lend it out to someone else, like your friend and family member, Fred, right here. And then Fred has this stuff that you gave the bank. And then what happens if the bank gets in trouble and the Federal Reserve needs to do quantitative easing or something like that? Then the Federal Reserve prints up some more of this stuff that you gave the bank and gives it to them so they don't go bust. Or maybe they need some more. So then the bank takes what the Fed gave them and then they give it out to other people that want to buy it, to borrow stuff. And those people take the money that they receive from Fred and they give it right back to the bank. This is completely inaccurate. Now, most of you have been watching my videos for quite some time, so you'll be saying to yourself, okay, George, I get it. It actually doesn't work with this money going back and forth. Really, the banking system themselves create the money. So if they want to lend to your friend and family member Fred, they really don't even need Joe to deposit money in the bank. They go ahead and create the money out of thin air, so then their balance sheet has the money they just created, and that's a liability of the commercial bank. That's an asset of Fred. But then on the asset side of their balance sheet, they have the loan, the contractual obligation for Fred to pay them back with interest. And obviously this loan would be a liability on Fred's balance sheet. So in this scenario, the bank is acting as an intermediary, let's say. And in this scenario, which is far more accurate, the bank is creating money, and I'm just using the term money loosely for, let's say, dollars. They're creating those dollars out of thin air. But I must admit that even this is inaccurate. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go down to this next quadrant where we've got the Federal Reserve and a bank. We have their balance sheets, assets on the left, liabilities on the right. Well, this is simply a ledger. That's all it is. Just like you having a shared Excel spreadsheet or Google Docs, something like that. So let's just assume on the liability side of the bank, they have 100. Okay. On the asset side, 100. All right. Well, those assets are a liability to the Fed. So if the Fed shows 100 on their liability side, and then they have 100 worth of assets to match up, boom, green check mark. We are all good to go. Now, all of a sudden, because these ledgers reconcile, that means effectively we have money. But what happens if we have 100, 100, and 90? Now, all of a sudden, the ledgers do not reconcile. Something is wrong. Therefore, the system breaks, the ledgers don't work, there's no trust between counterparties, and all of a sudden, we have no money. And if you're not following this completely, don't worry about it. I'm going to explain it further throughout the rest of this video. In fact, let's go over to this next quadrant. I'm going over the main takeaways from this step number 1. And the main takeaways from this entire video, I think, or the main takeaway, is you have to get your head around the fact there is no money. It doesn't exist. There are no dollars. There are no euros. There are no pesos. There are no yuan. There's no yen. Nothing. It's pixie dust. It doesn't exist.
Fairy dust. It doesn't exist. It's never landed. It is no matter. It's not on the elemental chart. It's not real.
Now, it is true the cash in your pocket exists, obviously. Those green pieces of paper, currency, cold, hard cash, that exists. But that is a very small fraction of the overall monetary system. But what most people see as money, which is their checking account balance, really isn't money at all. Like my good friend Chris Cole says, it's simply a thought abstraction. And putting it into more real terms, all it is a network of ledgers that reconcile, therefore provide the trust for the participants in the real economy and the financial economy, for that matter, to go ahead and transact. Let me give you a super simple example so everyone is on the same page. We'll go right up here, and we've got 2 cavemen. Obviously, we've got Caveman Mo, and we've got Caveman Joe. So Caveman Joe needs some sort of dinosaur cow type of creature, and he gets this from Mo. Okay. Well, what does Mo get? Well, they simply go to the nearest cave and they go up on the wall and they say, okay, Mo, we're going to go ahead and give you 2 points. And Mo says, okay, well, what do I need these 2 points for? Joe says, because I'm going to take your cow dinosaur, you're going to give it to me, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you milk that you need for your family. And when I give you a certain amount of milk, we're going to go ahead and delete the 2 credits that you have. We're going to erase them from the wall of the cave. And then we're going to go ahead and be all square. Now, in this transaction, was there any money? No. It was just simply a very crude ledger, just like the ledgers that we use in the banking system in the Federal Reserve today. And the main reason that this transaction occurred was because there was trust within the 2 counterparties. There was no money. The only thing there was a record of the transaction and the agreement between the 2 counterparties involved. So my point is a central bank digital currency is not new money. How can you have new money when money doesn't exist to begin with? What it is a modified version of our current network and ledger system. And this is the truth about central bank digital currencies that nobody is talking about. And this makes a huge difference as to how they will impact your life. Not if they come, but when they come. Step number 2. Now let's go over how the central planners and the authoritarians will most likely implement the central bank digital currency, or better said, the CBLSS. That's what I'm calling it from now on. The Central Bank Ledger System and Software. A much more accurate title. So this is the way the system works now. As far as the balance sheets, we're going to take it one step further than we did in step number 1. We've got the Federal Reserve right here, the banks, then we have the average Joe, business Bob and the fat cat, the guy that runs the hedge fund or the financial institution, the non-bank financial institution. So right now, on the liability side of the Fed's balance sheet, we have the bank reserves. These are assets of the commercial banks themselves. Now again, there is no money in here. It's just a pretty crude ledger system. It's a way of keeping score, just like the cavemen were doing in step number 1. But I've got things color-coded in this step so you can really start to understand whose assets are whose liabilities. All right, so let's go through this. Like we said, the assets of the banks, well, just assuming the bank reserves, are liabilities of the Fed. The assets of Joe, Bob, and Fat Cat are liabilities of the commercial banks. And again, when I'm talking about assets, I'm just talking about their dollar assets, their quote-unquote cash. So when they implement this system, what will change first is the modification of the ledgers or the consolidation of the retail ledgers onto the Fed's ledger. I know that may be a little confusing, so let me walk you through it. So after the change is made to a central bank ledger system and software, the assets of Joe and Bob will go from the commercial banks to the Federal Reserve. So what I'm saying here is their checking accounts, instead of being liabilities of the banks, will be a liability of the Fed. Said another way, all of the information from their daily transactions will be aggregated and in real time will go directly to the Federal Reserve instead of the banks. Just think about the bank statement you have right now, that you could go to lunch this afternoon at Chipotle, and you could go home and you could pull up your bank statement online and it would say Chipotle, $20 or whatever it is. And you would see that going to your bank's website. But in the future, the commercial bank will not have that information. It will go directly to the Federal Reserve's ledger, and then they will have the new software to be able to track those transactions. And another detail that nobody is talking about is although the assets, the dollar assets of the retail participants in the economy will go to the Fed's balance sheet, I don't think the financial institutions' assets will. Because I don't think the Fed wants to completely disrupt the current system. What about the repo market? What about the euro dollar market? What about the financial economy that we talk about on this channel all the time? The Fed knows darn well that if they disrupt that, then the whole entire house of cards comes crashing down. And that would have devastating impacts for society at large, not just the real economy. So the assets of the fat cat will remain on the bank's balance sheet so they can continue with their financial economy. It's almost like we're compartmentalizing the financial economy with the real economy. And the real economy's balance sheet is moving to the Federal Reserve. Or said another way, the ledger system for the real economy is moving to the power and control of the Fed's ledger system. It's consolidating it, where the ledger system for the financial economy will most likely remain intact. So what's going to be the catalyst that will prompt this change? Is the government going to force people to do this? No. Actually, I think this is the easy part. Because when we have the next financial crisis, I think most likely the Fed will do a different type of quantitative easing. Most of you know from watching my videos that quantitative easing is where the Fed buys assets from the commercial banking system, or this is one form of quantitative easing. But I think in the future, in the next financial crisis, what they'll do is say, hey guys, instead of buying assets, why don't we just take your liabilities? Because if the average Joe and Jane, and if Bob and if Fat Cat are worried about their money being good at the bank and the bank's collapsing, if they're worried about the next GFC, well, that's easy. All we have to do is take those assets onto the balance sheet of the Fed, because the Federal Reserve is a bank that can't go bust. So this instills the confidence that they need in a panic type of situation. And I think they'd also include universal basic income and higher interest rates. So if you're the average Joe and Jane that knows nothing about this, what's not to like? You get free money, your money is safe, you don't even need FDIC insured banks anymore, and plus you get a higher rate of interest on your checking and savings account. Then of course, what the government will need to do is ban cash. More on that in step number 3. But also, and this is key, they'll need to involve Bob the businessman, or businessman Bob, whatever his name is. Because the only way this plan will work is if they change or have a new type of software system, a new network for point of sale. I know most of you saw POS and thought it stood for something else. But we won't go down that path. We won't go there. So I think in this new system, what the government will do, along with banning cash, is they'll say, hey, businessman Bob, in order to get your business license, you have to use this new software. And this software will be a part of the network that will give the Fed the additional data they need to control your life. And when I say the Fed, I'm using that as a proxy term for the central planners and the authoritarians. So let me give you an example of how this would work. Well, we talked about you going to lunch today at Chipotle and then going to your Wells Fargo account and seeing the transaction right there on your bank statement. Okay, well, we know that because you use your Wells Fargo account, your card, that Wells Fargo has the information from Bob, let's say he owns Chipotle, because you use your debit card there. But what the banks don't have is the details of those transactions, and that's what the central planners and the authoritarians want. So they'd have to modify or use a different type of software, which would give them not just the name of the vendor, in this case Chipotle, but also an itemized list of exactly what you bought. So now when you go to your Fed bank statement, let's say, it'll not only show that you went to Chipotle for lunch, but it'll also show what you ordered. Did you order chicken? Did you order beef? Did you order something vegetarian? Why do they want to know this? So they can give you a carbon credit score and they can control your spending for whatever is convenient or whatever fits the current political narrative. In this case, I'm assuming it's going to be climate change. So quick review of this point of sale for the new central bank ledger system and software, aka central bank digital currency, is instead of them just getting the vendor information, they're going to get the vendor information along with every single item you purchased. That goes, instead of to the commercial bank, that goes to the Fed, and they have the new software that takes all the new data, which gives them this whole new type of control. So then the next question becomes, okay, George, well, I understand the banks are still going to operate the way they do in the financial economy. But what happens if I want to get a loan? Because right now the banks create all of the new money, or they keep track of the retail ledger system, and they can increase the money supply, or they can decrease the money supply based on how much they want to lend or how much credit they're extending into the real economy. And if the retail was now on the Fed's balance sheet, if the banks actually create the loans, then that would give them power to increase or decrease the size of the Fed's balance sheet. And the central planners probably won't like that. So the way I think this will work is if you want a home loan or an auto loan, you will still go to the banks. They will initiate the loan. They'll be like a loan broker, but they'll just act as a middleman and receive a commission, very similar to the way Fannie and Freddie work right now. So when you go down to Wells Fargo to get a home mortgage, let's say, they send that to their underwriting. But in reality, it's not Wells Fargo's underwriting. It's Fannie and Freddie. They're just checking off all the boxes. Because when they give you the loan, they increase the money supply. Before the ink's dry, they sell that loan to Fannie and Freddie. And that goes onto their balance sheet. So I think it would be the exact same thing with auto loans, with pretty much every type of loan in the future, is the underwriting would come from the central planners. But the execution of the loan itself would come from the banks, and they would receive a healthy commission from the Federal Reserve. After the banks receive the commission, then the borrower's account would be increased by that amount, and the loan would go from the bank straight over to the Fed. So in my opinion, this is how it would play out. Step number 3, how to protect yourself from Big Brother and 1984. Most of you watching this video understand the downsides of a central bank digital currency, or this change that we've been referring to throughout this video. So I'm not going to spend too much time going over why this would be an Orwellian nightmare. So let's focus on what you can do to make sure that you protect as much of your freedom, liberty, and privacy as possible. So right here, we've got the Federal Reserve and the real economy. These are the central planners. And over here in the real economy, we've got the average Joe and Janes and the businesses. Okay, so in step number 2, we talked about how this network would change and how all the data would now be going to the centralized ledger, the Federal Reserve, let's say, or the Treasury, the government, and how that would give them complete control over what you spend. Okay, so the initial reaction, and even my initial thought, was, okay, well, let's just make sure they don't ban cash. Because if they don't ban cash, that gives you some sort of purchasing power to where you could go down to Chipotle, you could give them a $20 bill instead of using your bank card, and then the data wouldn't go anywhere. There wouldn't be any data to go to the centralized ledger, so they'd have no way of knowing how much beef or how much diesel you purchased during the month, and that wouldn't go against your monthly allotment based on their climate change objectives. I'm just using that as a hypothetical example. But after I really started to think this through, and I'm talking about just within the span of the last couple of hours, you guys are literally seeing me think through this problem in real time. Unfortunately, I don't know that cash is a solution. Let me tell you what I'm referring to. See, this really depends on the existing system. So in the existing system, you have 2 options. You're either going to use your card, which the bank is going to know about, or you're going to use cash, which only you and the vendor know about. But if I'm a central planner, I'm going to understand that this is going to be a problem. And even if I do ban cash, still, people might use it. I'm not going to be collecting all the data I want. So, and I hope it doesn't come to this, but if I had to put on my evil genius hat, what I would do is I would realize that it's not about money. It's really about the network and controlling the network through the central bank ledger system and software. So let's just say that you go down to Chipotle this afternoon and you have your $20 bill and you say, aha, I am going to get around the central planners and the authoritarians by using this cash. Or let's say it's gold, silver, Bitcoin, what have you. But let's just say that prior to ordering, when you walk through the door, there's a camera that has facial recognition and that can read your lips, that can tell everything you're saying. Maybe they have a microphone. So when you go to order, regardless of how you pay, the data still goes to the central planners. And we could also envision that in today's day and age, even without all of the spy equipment and tech, that you'd walk into that Chipotle and just before you place your order, the nice employee says, sir, before you do, if you could do me a huge favor and just give us your fingerprint right on the pad. Great, we got it. What can I get you for lunch? So obviously, if they have your fingerprint or if they have your facial recognition, you could pay in seashells. It doesn't matter. That data is still going to go to the Federal Reserve, and they are going to be able to control what you buy. See, again, it's this network with the vendors and the central planners. And why would the vendors cooperate? Because if they don't, the central planners will take away their business license. There will be some sort of financial penalty that will be so onerous that the business owners will comply even if they hate the policy, even if they're patriots, even if they're freedom and liberty lovers. They still have to put a roof over their head and feed their family. So they don't have a choice. So then I know a lot of you are saying, okay, well, there's going to be some vendors that are outside of the system. There will be a black market where they will take gold or silver. Okay, great, fantastic. And more power to you. That is definitely a solution. But right now, you have to start planning for that. You have to understand that your standard of living will deteriorate massively. What I'd like you to do is a 1-week challenge. So if you live in the United States or Europe or wherever, try to go an entire week without using the local currency at all. Try using exclusively gold, silver, or Bitcoin. You can't do it. Well, you might be able to if you live on a farm or if you're completely self-sufficient. But if you're the average American, your standard of living is going to decrease rapidly, dramatically within that week. Now, I'm not here to say that if they try to ban cash, we shouldn't push back. We should absolutely put our foot down as a society. But we have to understand that this might not be a total solution because they might incorporate that new technology such as facial recognition or your fingerprint. So you need to have a game plan. You need to start thinking about this right now. So what can you do to protect yourself? Well, first and foremost, I think community is absolutely key, whether that's around your physical location or online. Why? Because this will give you the ability to barter the specific climate change rations they give you. Let me give you an example. So let's just say that they give you a certain carbon allowance per month. So you can only buy 5 pounds of beef. Okay, Well, let's say that someone within your liberty-minded community is a vegetarian, but they drive a diesel truck. So let's say they get to their monthly limit for diesel, and you get to your monthly limit for beef. Let's assume you have a gas car. Okay, great. So what you can do is you can go ahead and buy diesel and give it to them, and they can go ahead and buy the beef and give it to you. And there's absolutely no way that the government, at least no way that I can think of, that they'd be able to track that. Next is to set up a plan for mobility. I know a lot of people online, especially in the Bitcoin space, say, hey, if the government does this, well, fine, so be it. I'm just going to take all of my purchasing power, put it right in my back pocket, and because it's so transportable, I'm just going to hop on the next plane and go to XYZ country that is far more favorable. And this is a good plan, absolutely. But that applies to Bitcoin, gold, silver, cash, what have you. Just going to a country that, like my good friend Andrew Henderson says, where you will be treated best. Or in this case, maybe where you will at least be treated better. But right now, this option applies to very few people. Why? Because we have a life. We have a family. Your kid's in school. You have a husband. You have a wife. You have friends. You have grandparents. You have a sense of community around you. And how many of you right now would pull your kids out of school, would get rid of your country club membership, would get rid of your gym membership, would have a spouse that would be agreeable to just packing up tomorrow and moving to El Salvador? Very few. So my point is, start talking about that right now. Start trying to figure out how you would make that move, if necessary, and what would be the line in the sand that would prompt you to go ahead and take action. Because then it becomes a rational, premeditated decision instead of an emotional, reactionary decision. And lastly, I'd like to encourage you to think about living a hybrid type of life if this mobility is not an option for you. So what does that mean? Okay, well, let's say that you have some sort of diesel truck and you know that the government is going to frown on that, and every single month you're going to hit your maximum. Okay, well, try to find some other fuel source. And I like diesel trucks, but I'm by no means an expert. But I do know they will run on different substances. So maybe you can create or make that substance in your shed. Or if you're someone that enjoys beef, but you know that at a certain point going to the store, that's not going to work, then maybe you could grow your own cattle. You could have your own ranch or something like this. What I do is I create a list of things that are important to you that the government most likely won't like. And then I would simply ask myself, how can I grow or produce these items myself? So if I have to, I'll sit there and live in their stupid system, but I'm not going to let it impact my life, because what they won't give me, I'll go ahead and create on my own and within the community that I have at a local level. And if you're not already pissed off enough about what will likely happen in the next decade or so, I'd like to remind you that my base case is that your life will change dramatically. The real economy will be micromanaged by the central planners. But the financial economy, there will be no change. The banksters, the fat cats, the Jamie Dimons of the world, they won't be controlled at all. It'll just be you, the average Joe and Jane, an entrepreneur, business owner, watching this video right now. At the end of the day, you are the serf, the peasant, the pleb that they despise and want to rule over. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist. right here. I will see you on the next video.